Hi everybody and welcome to today's video. What's going to happen to house prices in 2023? This one's going to surprise you. Well, I'll tell you, that's a little bit warmer. Now, let me start by saying that for the last 2 years we've made predictions about the UK property market, and without blowing our own trumpet too much, we've in the main been right. So the question is, can we be right this year as well? Now, I ought to mention that we're regularly featured in the mainstream press, Marie Claire, the Daily Express, the Daily Telegraph. So if you need to know what our thoughts are other than watching the video, click on the links in the description below and you'll see all our recent press articles and indeed our press history. Well, if you're listening out there in real time, you'll know that we face a massive set of instabilities. We've had 2 years of pandemic and necessary pandemic spending. We've had the war in Ukraine, and all of that has fueled a supply side inflation, which has led to a massive increase in interest rates. Recent government policy in the UK led to a devaluation in sterling and at least one, if not two, regime changes in the Conservative Party. And all of that has added to a sense of uncertainty. So what's going to happen in 2023? Well, here things get interesting because, as we all know, the property market and the property buyers are not all the same. The increase in interest rates, which, by the way, I predict that mortgage interest rates will be back around 4% by the middle of next year. Affordability is a major issue now for the domestic borrowed market, as it were. There is, however, other sectors of the market that do not need to borrow, for example, downsizers, and also a large influx of foreign buyers, many of whom are coming here because they have the right to live here, particularly those people from Hong Kong. And for them and for foreign investors, because of the decline in the value of sterling in Q4 of this year, UK property has become more than 10% cheaper, essentially offsetting any stamp duty costs. It's now become an attractive place to invest, and indeed for many people living in areas of less political or economic stability than the UK, and believe it or not, there are places that are less economically stable than the UK at the moment. It's become an attractive and safe place to live. So overall, what do I think will happen in 2023? Well, I think domestic demand will be depressed, but I think foreign demand and non-leveraged demand will compensate for it slightly. There'll be a slight fall in prices over Q4 2022, possibly even Q1 2023. What this will mean for 2022 figures is pretty much what we predicted. There will be low to mid double-digit growth in property prices. We'll have to wait until early in the new year to find that out. And in early part of 2023, I expect to see slow demand and only those people who have to sell being forced to sell, with a slight fall in prices. But over the whole haul of 2023, a full calendar year, we're talking about a year come Christmas, I expect to see low to mid single digit growth in the UK property market, somewhere between 5 and 8%. What's really interesting is that despite all the doom and gloom headlines we've been seeing, there is still an underlying pressure on the market, and that is leading to upward pressure on prices. There is still an undersupply of housing in this country, and if we are to meet the latent demand for housing, then something has to be done. High interest rates are not going to help developers to build properties if they need to borrow money to do this. So fundamentally, I expect to see, despite an austerity budget has been predicted for November 2022 for the government, I expect to see some easing of budgetary restrictions, possibly by as early as summer 23, depending on the economic outlook. Before we go on and talk about that in more detail, you should stick around to the end of the video, because at the end I'm going to tell you how you can put more money in your pocket by looking at whether you've overpaid your stamp duty and getting it back from HMRC. Because you wouldn't believe this, but in the last 12 months, we've actually exceeded the figures that we recovered during the pandemic, and that was over 12.5 million. In fact, in the last 12 months, we've recovered over £16.5 million from HMRC in overpaid SDLT. It's always worth getting your transaction checked. Let's have a little retrospect about what's gone on in the last 2.5 years. We had a complete shutdown of the property market at the start of the pandemic. Then we had the stamp duty holiday, which stimulated demand and got the market restarted. That was then rolled back, slowed the market down. Then in the middle of 2022, we had an increase in the thresholds, essentially restoring the holiday, and a massive increase in the threshold for first-time buyers. And all of that did and should have continued to assist people into getting onto the property ladder and in moving up. Unfortunately, as I say, we've had the increase in interest rates and consequently increase in mortgage repayments, and that has reduced affordability and caused people to have to tighten their purse strings a little bit and try to stay within their affordability criteria. But as I said earlier on in the video, it's not just UK domestic mortgage buyers who buy property. There are investors out there who can and do in fact afford to buy properties to satisfy the needs of those people who want to or indeed have to rent. And they're a permanent feature of our economy. Not everybody can or wants to afford to own a home for a variety of reasons. Some people prefer the flexibility, others just don't want the responsibility, and others simply at the moment have decided they do not want that kind of commitment at their time of life. What really has happened is that we now have this class of people who want to move to the UK, and they break down into three principal categories. First of all, you've got the overseas investor who regards UK property and any investment in the UK as a safe haven for capital for their money, because the country that they principally live in may not be as economically stable or even politically stable. They may be those who have decided to buy a second home in London simply because the attractiveness of London to live, and indeed other cities in the UK, to have a second home as a place to come to, it has increased. A lot of people have adapted their lifestyles during the pandemic, even the super wealthy, and are now very much based around working from home and enjoying their lives and saying, why don't we have a pad in London so we can go whenever we want to? The third class, of course, are those people who are trying to leave their country. A lot of people from Hong Kong are coming to this country now because they have the right to be here, they're British citizens, and they no longer wish to live in Hong Kong. And certainly outside of London, in the Midlands and in the North, we've seen a huge surge in Hong Kong Chinese buyers buying and moving into homes. But we've also seen a surge in Chinese-based millionaires and wealthy people who have decided that they're not happy with the Chinese regime and the direction it's going in, buying in London and indeed buying in the home counties. All of these factors over the course of the next 12 months, I believe, are what is going to support the UK market and leave it with a relatively modest but steady rate of growth. There will be no crash, there will be no 10-20% fall in property prices that we saw in the noughties. The UK property market has tended to be more stable than any other global market in property. So despite the doom and gloom, my prediction is going to be a bit of a bumpy ride for the rest of 22, first quarter or two of 23, but then over the long haul, throughout that year, a return to modest growth. We've now got to the point of the video where I tell you about what we do. Our brands, Cornerstone Tax and SDLT Refunds, are the leading specialists in stamp duty in the UK, so include land and building transaction tax in Scotland and land transaction tax in Wales. And we've been doing this since 2006. As I said earlier in the video, we're very, very good at finding overpayments. We're also very good on the Cornerstone side at preventing you making them in the first place. So if you're considering a property purchase and you wonder whether you might be eligible for relief, or the property you're buying may be eligible for relief, like multiple dwellings relief, or may indeed not be habitable, then talk to us before you do the deal. It is far better to get the advice in advance than have to do a reclaim. If, however, you've already bought and you feel you may have overpaid, then contact us, click on the links below, and we'll be able to tell you fairly quickly whether or not you've overpaid the tax and whether we can get it back for you. I can't but close this video at the end of what has been a turbulent year for us all without thanking you all for your support, for liking and subscribing, and if you haven't already done so, please do so on this video. And for pushing us over 500 subscribers. We are so pleased to be able to bring this sort of content to you, and we look forward to doing in the future. I've been David Hanna. This has been Cornerstone Tax SDLT Refunds. What's going to happen to property in 2023? Thank you for listening.